When Barron Trump decided to give up his first-class seat to an elderly veteran, no one on the flight could have anticipated the extraordinary family secret that would soon be revealed mid-air. What followed hit the cabin like a wave of unexpected emotion, leaving everyone in awe. The cabin lights flickered softly as passengers settled into their seats, the atmosphere buzzing with a mix of pre-flight anticipation and the usual chaos of boarding. It was a chilly morning at Miami International Airport, and Flight 124 to Newark was fully booked. Among the passengers was a young man seated in first class, a face that many instantly recognized, though his demeanor clearly expressed a wish to go unnoticed. Barron Trump, now a teenager towering over 6 feet tall, sat quietly by the window, engrossed in the pages of a hardcover book. Unlike other members of his family, Barron rarely appeared in public, yet the name on his boarding pass inevitably drew attention. Not far away, in the economy section, an elderly man in his 70s made his way slowly through the rows. His silver hair was neatly combed, his back slightly hunched, and his steps deliberate, as though each movement told a story. In his hands, he clutched a worn leather bag and his boarding pass tightly, seemingly carrying a lifetime of experiences with him. Passengers exchanged glances as he passed by. The military jacket he wore, adorned with faded patches and medals, told a tale of service and sacrifice. Some whispered, wondering about his past, while others simply admired the quiet dignity in his stride. The veteran took his seat near the rear of the plane, wedged between a talkative businessman and a restless toddler. Meanwhile, flight attendants moved briskly through the aisles, ensuring everyone was seated for takeoff. A sudden ripple of tension coursed through the cabin. The man, seated next to the veteran, grew visibly agitated, insisting on a different seat. As the veteran apologized for the inconvenience, the commotion caught Barron's attention from his comfortable spot in first class. He leaned slightly into the aisle, his brows furrowing thoughtfully. Without a word, he pressed the call button for a flight attendant. "Excuse me," Barron said softly when the attendant arrived. "Can I switch seats with the gentleman in the military jacket?" The flight attendant blinked, momentarily stunned. Passengers in first class glanced up from their newspapers and tablets, their curiosity piqued. Barron's offer was unexpected, especially in a world where privilege often goes unquestioned. Yet, his expression was sincere, and his tone left no room for argument. "Let me check," the attendant replied, her voice tinged with surprise as she briskly walked toward the back of the plane. As Barron stood to grab his carry-on, murmurs began to spread in first class. A woman across the aisle leaned toward him. "You don't have to do that, you know. You paid for this seat," she said, her voice tinged with confusion. Barron simply smiled and shrugged. Some people deserve it more. What happened next changed the tone of the entire flight. The flight attendant returned a few minutes later, her expression a mix of admiration and curiosity. "He said he'd be happy to switch," she informed Barron, her voice slightly unsteady. It wasn't every day someone voluntarily gave up a first-class seat, let alone a teenager with such a famous name. Barron smiled politely and nodded, grabbing his bag as he made his way through the narrow aisle. Whispers followed him as he passed, with some passengers nudging each other to confirm what they were witnessing. A few discreetly reached for their phones, snapping photos. Barron seemed unfazed by the attention, his focus solely on the elderly man seated at the back of the plane. When Barron arrived, the veteran looked up, a mix of surprise and confusion crossing his face. "Are you sure, young man?" he asked, his voice warm but firm. "You don't have to do this for me. I want to," Barron replied, extending his hand. "Thank you for your service. Please take my seat." The veteran hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to accept the gesture, but the sincerity in Barron's eyes was undeniable. Slowly, he stood, shaking Barron's hand firmly. "Thank you. That's an incredibly kind thing to do." As the veteran made his way to first class, the murmurs among passengers grew louder. A young mother in row 15 whispered to her teenage daughter, "Did you see that? He just gave up his seat." The businessman seated next to Barron raised an eyebrow. "Never seen anything like that on a flight," he muttered to himself. Barron slid into the now vacant economy seat, folding his tall frame into the cramped space. He appeared completely at ease, ignoring the scattered stares from fellow passengers. A flight attendant passed by, discreetly asking if he needed anything. But Barron simply shook his head and reopened his book. In first class, the veteran settled into the luxurious seat, visibly overwhelmed by the unexpected comfort and kindness. Adjusting the armrest with slightly trembling hands, he glanced around. A flight attendant approached him, offering a complimentary drink and a warm blanket. "The young man said you should have this seat," she explained. The veteran smiled faintly. "It's been years since I've been treated like this," he murmured. He glanced back toward the economy section, where Barron sat calmly, engrossed in his book. The gesture, though small, carried immense meaning. For a moment, the cabin seemed to exhale collectively, and the tension of boarding dissipated. Passengers settled into their seats, and the plane taxied to the runway. But as the engines roared and the flight lifted into the sky, this story was far from over. What seemed like a simple act of kindness was about to take an unexpected turn. Once the plane reached cruising altitude and the soft hum of the engines filled the cabin, flight attendants moved through the aisles with drinks and snacks. But the atmosphere was anything but ordinary. Passengers kept glancing between Barron Trump in economy and the elderly veteran now seated in first class. Whispers of admiration spread, but the story was only beginning. The veteran sat quietly at first, sipping his water and gazing out the window. His hands rested on his lap, trembling slightly. Then, as though compelled by the weight of the moment, he turned to the passenger next to him. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "I have to say this," he began, his voice just loud enough to be heard. The woman looked at him, intrigued. The veteran adjusted a small pin on his lapel. A purple heart. And took a deep breath. "The young man who gave me his seat, his family once saved my life." The woman blinked, startled. "What do you mean?" The veteran leaned back, his voice growing steadier as he began to recount his story. "Decades ago, during the Vietnam War, I was stationed overseas, far from home, with no family support. I was severely injured, shot twice in the leg. When I finally made it back to the States, I was lost. No purpose, no direction, nothing." His voice wavered, but he continued. "I ended up in New York, trying to rebuild my life. I had nowhere to stay and barely enough money for food. One day, I ran into a man outside a diner. He saw me struggling. He didn't just hand me $1 and walk away. He sat with me and listened to my story. That man was Donald Trump's father, Fred Trump." The woman's eyes widened, and a few nearby passengers, subtly eavesdropping, leaned in closer. "Fred Trump?" she asked. The veteran nodded, his expression turning wistful. "Yes. He didn't owe me anything, but he made sure I had a roof over my head and a job to get back on my feet. He never asked for anything in return. He just said, 'You served this country. This is the least we can do.' I'll never forget those words." By now, the story had captured the attention of several first-class passengers, and it began to ripple through the cabin. The veteran's voice grew stronger as he continued, his eyes misting with gratitude. "I always wanted to thank his family, but I never got the chance. Life moved on, and I thought that moment was lost forever." He paused, taking a deep breath, his gaze shifting toward Barron, who sat calmly in economy. "And today, the grandson of that man gave me a gift I will never forget." What are the odds of something like this happening in economy class? Barron sat there, completely oblivious to the growing buzz around the plane. He was absorbed in his book, his long legs awkwardly tucked into the cramped space. Meanwhile, in first class, the veteran's revelation had sparked something far deeper. Passengers began exchanging glances, whispers of amazement spreading like wildfire. A flight attendant leaned toward the veteran. "Would you like me to tell him what you just shared?" she asked gently. The veteran hesitated, then shook his head. "Not yet. Let the boy enjoy his peace. He doesn't need to know how much this means to me, not right now." But the passengers couldn't contain their astonishment. What had started as a simple act of kindness now carried a sense of destiny, as though the universe had aligned for this very moment. And then, something even more remarkable happened. The veteran sat quietly for a few moments, his story lingering in the air like an unspoken challenge. Nearby passengers exchanged knowing glances, some leaning in closer to share their thoughts in hushed tones. The flight had shifted from an ordinary journey to something profoundly moving. The man seated directly across from the veteran broke the silence. He appeared to be in his early 40s, his face tired, yet approachable. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "But your story really hit home. My grandfather served in Vietnam too. He used to talk about how much it meant when people back home cared enough to help. Hearing what Fred Trump did for you, well, that's rare. Too rare." The veteran nodded, a faint smile forming on his lips. "It's the little things, son. People don't realize how far a small act of kindness can go. Back then, I thought my life was over. But that man's generosity gave me a second chance." Across the aisle, a young mother chimed in, cradling a sleeping toddler. "You know, my dad used to say the same thing. He wasn't a veteran, but he always told me that when someone lifts you up, even just a little, you should pass it on. It's like a chain reaction. What Barron did today, it's proof that kindness still matters." The veteran's eyes softened as he listened. "It's true. And it's not just about grand gestures. Sometimes just being seen, being acknowledged, can change everything. That's what Fred Trump did for me, and today his grandson did it again." Passengers continued sharing their stories, each one more heartfelt than the last. A visibly moved flight attendant perched on the armrest of an empty seat near the veteran. "I wasn't planning to say anything," she admitted. "But my brother served in Iraq. He didn't talk much about it, but when he came home, he told me that the people who stopped to thank him or helped him in small ways, those were the moments that stuck with him. Sometimes, those moments were the only thing keeping him going." The veteran nodded in understanding, his expression a mix of empathy and quiet pride. "Your brother's right. It's those little things that keep you grounded when everything else feels like it's falling apart." In economy class, Barron noticed a few passengers glancing in his direction, their expressions a mix of admiration and gratitude. He didn't fully understand the context of what was happening, but he offered a polite nod to a woman who smiled at him. That small gesture, though simple, had sparked a cascade of reactions and connections no one on the flight could have anticipated. The veteran turned to the flight attendant and said, "You know, I've always believed that gratitude doesn't just stop with the person who helps you. It grows. Fred Trump helped me rebuild my life, and every day since I've tried to honor that by helping others. Today, Barron reminded me of that mission. Funny how life works, isn't it?" The plane hit a patch of turbulence, causing a slight jolt among the passengers. Despite this, the atmosphere in the cabin remained calm. Conversations unfolded like a shared release, as if everyone on board was connected by an invisible thread of kindness, gratitude, and human resilience. Just as the plane began its descent, the most unexpected moment occurred. As the flight approached Newark, the chatter in first class gradually subsided. The veteran sat quietly, his hands clasped together, gazing out the window, lost in thought. Around the cabin, passengers exchanged meaningful glances, some still marveling at the extraordinary events that had just transpired. Right as the captain announced the final approach, the flight attendant, who had overheard the earlier conversation, approached Barron in economy. She knelt slightly to meet his eye level and spoke softly. "I thought you might want to know. The gentleman you gave your seat to shared something special about your family. Would you like to hear it?" Barron looked up from his book, curiosity flickering in his eyes. Slowly, he closed the cover, its title unreadable, and answered simply, "Sure." His voice was calm, but intrigued. The attendant hesitated briefly, searching for the right words. "Years ago, your grandfather, Fred Trump, helped him during one of the lowest points in his life. He gave him a place to stay and a job, expecting nothing in return. And today, what you did for him reminded him of that kindness." For a moment, Barron said nothing. His expression remained composed, but his eyes softened, as though he was absorbing the weight of the story. Finally, he spoke. "That's something special, isn't it?" The flight attendant smiled. "It is. I thought you should know." When the plane landed, the veteran stood, his eyes momentarily hesitating before he moved. Instead of heading toward the exit as expected, he walked directly to the economy section. His eyes scanned the rows until they found Barron. The teenager, standing to retrieve his bag, looked up in surprise. The veteran approached, extending his hand, his voice steady and full of emotion. "Young man, I wanted to thank you personally. What you did today brought a circle in my life to completion. Your family has a legacy of kindness, and you've carried it forward. Never forget how much moments like these matter." Barron shook his hand firmly, his voice calm but sincere. "I didn't do anything special, sir. It was deserved." The cabin fell silent. Every passenger seemed to watch the exchange with unwavering attention. A few quietly wiped away tears, while others offered gentle smiles, lost in their own thoughts. The connection between these two individuals from different generations became a powerful testament to the enduring strength of gratitude and empathy, leaving no one on board untouched. As passengers disembarked one by one, many stopped to thank Barron for his thoughtful gesture. Others approached the veteran, shaking his hand and expressing gratitude for his service. The mood was warm, distinct from any flight they had ever experienced. At the gate, the veteran paused once more. Turning to Barron, he tipped his hat slightly, his eyes filled with respect. "You're a young man with a good heart. Don't ever lose that." Barron nodded, his usual composed demeanor softening slightly, revealing the genuine impact of the words. As he walked toward the baggage claim, Barron pulled out his phone and typed a short message. He hesitated for a moment, then pressed send. The text read simply, "Grandpa would have been proud today." This story serves as a reminder that even the smallest act of kindness can ripple far beyond the moment, connecting people in unimaginable ways. Kindness, gratitude, and empathy. These timeless values transcend boundaries, creating enduring bonds in the hearts of those they touch. If this story has touched your heart, we'd love for you to share its message by liking and sharing it with your friends. Help us reach our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. It means the world to us and allows us to create more meaningful stories for you. Don't forget to share your thoughts about the story and let us know which city you're watching from. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you in our next story.